Sorry about that, everybody. We're still figuring out the really rudimentary tech here. So I meant to pause things for a moment, but I actually killed the feed. But we're right back where we left off, and Chris was talking about organized play and kind of the future of organized play for KeyForge. So sorry that this is now 2 videos. I'll see if I can splice it into one later, but here we go. So go ahead, Chris, take it away.
Yeah, so I think the one advantage that we have going into KeyForge that none of the Fantasy Flight games, except perhaps Destiny, have had, is the ability to give product as a prize. Because in all the living card games and mostly in the miniature games as well, it's really difficult either from a money perspective or a practicality perspective to give the actual product as prizes, because in LCGs you have the cards already.
Yeah, you don't want it.
And in miniatures, you either have them already or they're prohibitively expensive. So, you know, everybody would kick in $5 and the winner would get one model and then everybody else would get nothing. So I think that the ability to, you know, give decks as prizes and kind of load people back up with product is self-perpetuating, because, you know, you win a tournament, you get a bunch of extra decks. Now you have more cool decks to play in tournaments later, or you can give them away to people or trade them. Or so I think that sort of ecosystem hasn't been present for Fantasy Flight in the past, and I think that'll be a big help.
Now, tell me if I'm wrong. Wasn't Game of Thrones originally a collectible card game?
It was. That's true. I guess you're right. That I guess.
I mean, that was a complete, like, I don't think anybody who is, well, I don't know, but not many people, maybe Brian or somebody, not many people who were there then are still with the company. So it is pretty much a new experience for them. But
yeah, that was, I think that 07 was the last set for a collectible Game of Thrones set. So it's been a minute.
Cool. Well, I think I'm really excited. Again, I love the unknown. Anybody who tells you, and I experienced this a lot while I was demoing at PAX, anybody who tells you that they know what the future holds for this game, they don't know, don't listen to them. Now, it's fun to speculate, but anybody who tells you they know for sure what the future holds, yeah, they don't know what they're talking about. So cool. I'm pretty excited to see where we go, and maybe we can kind of discuss it and experience it together on this cast, and maybe some people will actually start joining in that conversation. Yeah. Somebody might watch this. All right. So moving on, we wanted to talk about a few little topics that have popped up here in this first week of KeyForge. And the first one we wanted to talk about was secondary market, which I think we all knew something was coming. What's been fun is before the game launched, there was a lot of speculation on what was coming. And I think a clincher was this. I got to like cover the code or whatever, but I think a clincher was this, was the fact that decks you can see what is in a deck without unwrapping the deck.
Yeah.
Once that was super clear, and I mean, when we got them at PAX, we just unwrapped them really fast, honestly. So I wasn't really paying attention to that. But I think that really, if they didn't want a secondary market, then they probably shouldn't have put a deck list viewable through cellophane on the front of every deck. Yeah. So what do you think about this whole secondary market thing?
It's really interesting, because it's the same and it's different than kind of other games, because of it's a secondary market, but it's not a singles market.
Yeah.
But then to some extent it is a singles market, because there are basically, from what I've seen, 2 or 3 categories of decks that sell. There's ones that sell for face value that are standard decks that people are like, oh, I like that house combination, or oh, that's got a cool combination of cards in it.
Yeah, something's crazy when the fact is right now it feels like you can open a deck and sell it for more than you bought it for.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. But then there's a second tier up, which is like if you have something weird like a Maverick, which I love. I don't actually own any of, but the concept of Mavericks is so cool. And that's another tier. Like if you have a Maverick in your deck, it'll definitely sell for more than the regular value. And then there's that last tier of the Horsemen, and they've kind of been the hysteria that's taken over the community in the first few days of the game being out there. So for those who haven't seen it or aren't familiar, the 4 Horsemen are essentially it's one rare that is as rare as any other rare, but it comes with 3 special cards that are always included with it, and they're the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse: Pestilence, Death, War, and Famine, I believe. And they're strengthened cards, and they synergize really well together. They all have texts that kind of play off each other, and one of them fetches the others back from the graveyard and things like that. But people have been seeing these as kind of the boogeymen of the meta game, which there isn't a meta game yet because there haven't really been tournaments yet. But there have been decks that have been selling for hundreds of dollars, and in some cases a couple of thousands of dollars, which is crazy to me.
I'm not convinced they have to be the boogeymen to be valuable. In other words, if they are perceived as valuable, I don't know what FFG's plan is for KeyForge long term. But let's say that they are just perceived as like the it thing of this first set, and somewhere around February, March, the first set goes out of print. It might not matter if they're powerful as much as a double Horseman deck is like one of the only ones that will ever exist. Because that's what's interesting about a Magic secondary market is there are some bad cards that are valuable because of their rarity, being on the restricted list, that kind of stuff. And I could see something like that occurring specifically for the Horsemen, just because it became the thing that they became the thing for this set, and this is the first set. I don't know that I have no idea what the real value is. It could be drastically less than 2K. But if I was to wager on why something becomes really valuable long term, like we're talking 5 years from now, it might have less to do with gameplay and more to do with it was the thing at the launch.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at like the Power 9, some of them are still good. Some of the Power 9 are not good anymore, and those are the 9 most rare Magic cards that people paid the most money for. But some of them are not that good anymore, but they're still part of the Power 9. And I think you're seeing that effect with the Horsemen, that eventually, even if, as you say, the meta overcomes the Horsemen and overtakes them and they're kind of mediocre, people are going to see those and still remember, like, oh man, it was so cool seeing those for the first time. And you know, they're the most unique thing about the first set from what I've seen, because
do you think it's possible for Horsemen to go Maverick in the procedural generation?
Ooh, I can't imagine that it is. We haven't seen a special that also goes Maverick. So we haven't seen a time traveler or a Horseman. I don't believe we've seen a Maverick one of the Masters yet. There's the Masters of 1, 2, and 3. And I don't think those are Maverick either, although I could be wrong. But that's the really interesting thing, is we don't know for sure until somebody finds it.
I know. It seems like every time somebody says this is a thing that can't be done, somebody posts a deck that does it. So like I've seen that happen a few times. So I'm not saying I have no idea. I'm just curious. Yeah, cool. I think the secondary market, first of all, the person-to-person secondary market is very healthy, and I have no problems with like people who are just selling the decks through Facebook or eBay or whatever. Like whatever. I'm kind of curious where this goes for businesses. Like we've seen cool stuff, unwrapping decks and selling them. And they may have, like, foreseeably, they've put themselves in a good position because they've become the de facto standard by being first, right? Like in some ways, they are now pulling what Star City and some other Magic sellers are able to do, where they almost get to set what the value of a card is. I see them starting to almost be able to decide what the value of decks are. So we'll see. We'll see how that goes. I'll be very curious, watching carefully. Just my stores don't sell Magic singles. We don't sell really open products, so it's like a completely different market. So I feel like I can comment on it and talk about it without worrying about. Yeah. So
it's been really interesting to see the way that stores have decided to deal with that, though. Like Cool Stuff has, from what I've seen, essentially 3 tiers of pricing, where they have like their what they believe to be normal decks, and then there's a level that's, I think, that are like $79.99 for a deck, and then there's, if it has a Horseman in it, I think it's $119 for a deck. But then I've also seen a couple other stores not post the lists and say, hey, you have this combination of houses, but we're not going to tell you the cards that are in it or the deck name, so you can't look it up. So you're kind of just playing off of whether you think the house themes are fun and if you want that house combination, which I think is pretty cool.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting. Huh. That's really interesting. Yeah, I'll be really curious to see where we are a year from now. We should definitely do a, if we still exist a year from now, we should do a kind of look back on some of those topics. Cool. So what about all these decks with the band names?
That's been interesting to watch. I don't know if you saw, but there was a Kotaku actually picked it up today, and there was an article on Kotaku about.
I've been waiting for some of the mainstream press to start to pick it up.
Yeah, and it's funny.
Mainstream with quotation marks, but yeah.
Well, it's funny you mention the mainstream press because Fantasy Flight put up a mostly unrelated post today that was their like holiday gift buying guide, and somebody in the comments was like, "Oh, sure, no support for X-Wing. All your focus is on KeyForge these days."
Whoa. X-Wing players are complaining about support?
Yeah. And they went on to say, they were like, it's clearly just a media grab because of these band names and you're just trying to get in the papers. And they tagged NBC News for some reason, like on
what?
Expecting NBC News is going to be like, oh, what is this person talking about Fantasy Flight games?
They do not care.
No, they don't care. I think it's been really interesting.
That is crazy that X-Wing players would get. This is going to come up a lot as we do these casts. I hate when people take like a single tweet and then use that tweet to make a abject statement about an entire community. I can't imagine most X-Wing players feel like that, but I think it is funny.
Sure.
Yeah.
But I think it's been interesting to watch how the community's reacted to those. It's been almost like whenever one comes up and is posted, and then they're like, "Oh, this is a band name." Everybody does the "whoo!" like, "Oh, they said a swear!" Like,
yeah, like my company Slack. It was like the first day of release or pre-release, even all people are posting on our Slack was like what different names that popped up on Facebook and Reddit and wherever, even opened in store. So it's pretty funny. And I have one customer who hasn't even. I have a customer.
Banned.
Oh yeah, I have a customer who hasn't played yet, and he just keeps opening decks because he thinks the names are so funny, which is like a whole other level of. He's bought boxes just for names.
Impressive. I hadn't seen that level of dedication for sure. I feel like it's tough because I think the list was 10,000 words or something like that they're using. So on the one hand, that's a lot of words to go through. On the other hand, it feels like a few of the words that are clearly ones that have been kicked back out due to banning are words that you're like, why did you also put that on the list?
Sometime I have a friend who actually works for Amazon who works in like this whole AI development kind of side of things. So we should have him on sometime to talk about the procedural generation side. But one of the things that I have heard is that part of it is with procedural generation, the machine is learning. So there may be words that it's literally inventing that are real words. And I heard that for like, for example, I think race comes up in there, or racism. Racism came up.
Yes.
And a lot of people thought that was because race, like the computer's thinking race, like fantasy races or like the races in the like world or whatever. And suddenly it creates racism, which really means a different contextual thing in the real world. And so it could be as the computer goes on. I'll be also curious, will they just let this computer keep learning through sets? So are the deck names going to get more something? I don't know what. So like, will the next set have smarter names? Kind of. I don't know. So, anyways, yeah, I understand. Companies really got to protect themselves. Now, I own a company. I understand. It's just kind of all it takes is like one bad tweet about something you did, even if it was procedurally generated, and it can snowball. And I think they did a good job of saying, hey, we're just going to give you 2 more decks. Now, if you open one of those decks and it's an amazing deck, I'm sorry, that sucks. On the other hand, that deck, because it's a band name deck, is probably worth money in its own way as well. So
yeah, that's the other decks that have been kind of selling for a lot of money on eBay are the ones that the app actually kicked out. So they're not tournament legal even, but these people are like, ooh, now I have a collector's item. It's a different angle on on collecting, which has been
I think
interesting.
that's healthy for the game, honestly. I think it's healthy when there's that kind of market as well. So,
Absolutely.
do you have a favorite house?
I think my favorite house so far has been Logos, just because I'm a blue player at heart. So drawing cards and manipulating my deck is kind of my jam. So I've really been enjoying those.
I think it was initially my favorite, but Dis is really pulling on me. And what's interesting is I don't think that Logos, I hope we get into this as we start doing strategy topics in the future. I don't think that the things that would make Logos good in other games necessarily apply here. I'll be really curious to like maybe have some Netrunner players and some players who have played games where like card advantage and that sort of thing aren't the thing. Because we both have played a lot of Magic or I've played Magic and we played a lot of Game of Thrones where card advantage is a thing. But I know that economy can matter. And what's interesting about this game is really choices are almost your economy. Decision making, I'm still kind of figuring that out. I think a lot of us are figuring it out. And I think that's sadly, I feel like, so first of all, if this was just a regular CCG, nobody would care about it. So let's be honest about that. Everybody's complaining about the lack of deck building. Like, if there was deck building, this game would be a mid-range forgotten game.
Absolutely.
Transformers would be outselling it for sure, right? So, but with that, I had something to say with that, but I'm trying to remember what I had to say with that. With that is that I think that the procedural generation has taken over the narrative about this game, but I think that another really interesting part of this game is the design of the game itself. And the lack of resources and the fact that decision making. One of my employees actually said that this is a CCG if Rainer Knizia designed it, who has made a lot of like Euro games about like hard choices, right? Lost Cities is a 2-player game. Yeah. And so I often feel like I'm making hard choices. I also think that may be why the game is slower than FFG Imagine, because the resource is decision making actually in this game. So,
right.
Yeah. So I think Dis is starting to pull me, but I really want a Sanctum Logos discs deck. I don't need the 4 Horsemen. I just want those 3 in a deck to play it and see if I like it. And I have not. I can't seem to get that trio.
Yeah,
so.
I don't have one either. That does seem like a neat trio to me. I think an interesting thing that you just brought up is I'm curious if we'll ever see any kind of peeks behind the curtain as to where the kind of the procedural generation and the game design kind of merged, because did they put thought into it? Did they say at least your deck must have at least this number of this type of card? Did they break it up by effect? Did they say you can only have this many cards that naturally generate amber? You know, there's all these different directions that the AI could be taking it, and we don't know.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of room in this game versus a lot of other CCGs to even experiment a little bit more with that. They can really mess with things, and I don't know what their formats are going to be with future sets, but it could potentially be like I don't know. They have a lot of room to play here and be more experimental, which I can say from doing a lot of play testing and some development. It's scary to make powerful things.
Sure.
There are times where I was working on some games and I said, I think this card or this whatever should do this, and it was a more powerful thing. And the designer just said, yeah, sure, absolutely. And then they changed it. And then I felt like, I like that. Suddenly that fear that you have maybe created the broken card accidentally in the moment hits. And so I think I'll be really interested for them to be, I just feel like they can be riskier in their design with this, because it's kind of in this, well, for one thing, you can't build a deck and break a thing necessarily. So things can be broken based on it appearing, but even then it's only going to be a few decks where it's broken. And then I don't know what their plan is as far as competitiveness with chains. My understanding is really competitive events aren't going to use chains, but I could see them being like, okay, there's these decks that have these 2 cards in the deck, even in competitive environments, you're getting some chains or something. So
the game to be based on the competitiveness and stuff like so they have their regionals, and then in national, continentals, and worlds. And so whatever the equivalent is, I think you can see as a deck.
Sorry, Chris, you're breaking up there for a moment. Let's see if.
Let me know what I do. I changed anything. So
you're roboting. You're turning into a robot. Let me make sure that I'm using as little bandwidth at my house as possible.
Sure.
Because that happens. Cool. Anyways, I think you're back.
Cool. So what I was saying was that I think the way it's supposed to work is that as you increase in the various levels of Fantasy Flight's competition, the chains will fall off, and then you'll get new chains based on your performance at that level. Then when you go to the next level, they'll be separate again. And I think that provides kind of the powers that be with some possibilities for adding those chains, like you say. The other thing is, I want to double down on something you said. You said that it would be an ordinary CCG. I think that as a constructed game, it would just be a bad game. Like,
yeah, totally.
Like so many of these cards would not be acceptable in a guaranteed manner. Like, if you could guarantee I have 4 of this card, or even I have 3 of this card in my deck, it just
absolutely
would not work.
Totally agree.
And so that has been really cool to explore and see, like, well, let me see if I can find a deck that has 3 of this crazy card, or like has 2 of this card and 2 of this other card that goes really well with it. One that people have been talking about, I don't remember the exact cards. I think it's the Restringus, and then the weak. Basically, there's a way to lock your opponent out of the game for a turn.
Did you see Richard Garfield's comment on that too?
I did not know. What did he say?
He said that he actually wanted that to be a thing that you could do in the game. He felt like that was a kind of a gameplay that he actually wanted. It was really interesting. He actually wanted there to be lockout mechanics. He felt like they had gotten, in a way, it felt like he was almost saying like they got soft with later versions of Magic. And that he actually wanted there to be some of that sort of feel bad in this game, which we know, for those of you who have not played Game of Thrones. So if you played Magic, there's like the New World Order, and it's all about being nice to new players and being very welcoming. Game of Thrones, which goes with the world, I feel like the universe, all the feel bad mechanics that they kind of tossed out in Magic are like the theme of Game of Thrones, the card game, right? So yeah, it just, and I mean, that's one of the things I enjoy about it. It almost feels like old style Magic. And so I think it's interesting that Richard Garfield actually commented, and that I'll have to find that link. Maybe we could talk about it next week or in 2 weeks or whatever. But I thought it was interesting that he actually wanted that to be a thing that could exist in the game, because everybody was like, this is broken and bad design. And then you have the designer saying, no, I want that to happen.
Sure.
So,
and one thing that's interesting to me that I found is thinking about Richard Garfield's career trajectory and how he envisioned Magic being versus how it actually has turned out, where this is what he wanted in the beginning with Magic, where you wouldn't know the whole card pool, you wouldn't know for sure what your opponent has.
It was the beginning.
Exactly, and for like the very first year or 2 years, it was still people, genuinely discovering cards. Like, I'm playing in a tournament, I play this card. You've literally never seen this card before in your life. You don't know what it does, and you're just completely caught off guard by it, and you have to react to it. Well, these decks do that. There's combinations that people don't expect and haven't conceived, and people are going to get hit with them in tournament play, and it's going to be so exciting.
And the best part is you discover, usually I think how most players discover those combinations right now is through gameplay, not through like looking at cards, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, it's so hard to parse a deck list. I've tried, just like, I bought a box and I've got them sitting right here next to me, and I could look through these decks and
well, it's because there's so many cards. There's so many cards, and we're used to looking at constructed decks where there's like 3x of a card or 4x of a card, and really you're only looking at, like 20 different at most cards to then parse through. And even like an EDH deck in Magic, everything is very themed together. You're like, you can look at the first 12 cards of an EDH deck and understand what it does. but which is a singleton version of Magic where there's single copies of each card. But in this game, because of the procedural generation, the only way you really know what a deck does is by playing it, which is definitely, I think that's definitely what Richard envisioned Magic could be.
And ironically, it's caused me to like stay out of any sort of music secondary market, because I'm like, oh well, this is pretty rare. Like, to sell this for like more normal deck. But I'm terrified that if I sell it and it's an amazing deck, I'll myself and be like,
I know. I totally feel you. Like right now, nobody knows what's good yet. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. And what's interesting is I think by the time we know what is good, we'll probably be getting close to another set. At least I'm hopeful. So like, if they
another thing is how, like, they haven't even said anything about how new sets are going to work. Is it going to be an entire new card pool with entire new decks? Is it going to be we'll add a few cards and still have old cards? We don't know.
I have heard that they are not set on these 7 factions, that other factions will be able to exist in the game. That is the only thing I have heard, and that alone is very interesting. So I'll be curious to see that as well. Cool. Well, we're coming to the end. This was pretty good, but we thought we would have some fun at the end of every episode here of Cast of the Archons. I'm still learning our name, so getting used to that. And we thought that each week, at least this week, Chris is going to supply us with some of the best KeyForge deck names, Archon names he has found across the internet. And then maybe in future weeks, if anybody who's watching or listening wants to submit, like they think is, I'd like to see a picture, because people are going to just make stuff up. So you got to provide the evidence.
I mean,
provide the evidence.
People can make stuff up and then later discover it too. Like it's
my favorite is there's been a few people that have been discovering decks with their names in them, which is like, that's just crazy that they are opening a deck and it's like your name is on that deck. It's pretty hilarious.
Yeah, I vanity searched my name in the app and didn't come up with anything, but I do have a friend named Ryan Jones who I saw a deck online that was Jones the Marshal of Fun.
See, that's fantastic.
I tried to get it for him, but I couldn't.
Yeah.
But
cool.
The fact that those exist is so cool.
Absolutely. So every week we're just going to list off some of the best deck names we found across the internet. And so if you want to submit some of those, you can either post in the comments here, or you can also email us at castofthearchons@gmail.com. So what do you got for me, Chris?
I got 3 for you. The first one I found in the app itself. And the thing I find interesting about it is it uses a word that to me is just slang, an internet slang essentially, but yet it was in their 10,000 words. So this deck title is He Who Earnestly Pones Money. That's PWNS money.
That's in there?
It is.
So is that in their word list, or did it generate that? Like what? Pones
blew my mind.
The fact that word is in there bodes well for the future. There are going to be some great Pones decks.
Yeah. Oh, no
I see that coming down the pipe. That is fantastic. That's hilarious. And I didn't see that anywhere. You totally got me on that one.
And then, so the second one I found that I enjoy, this one's maybe not the most funny, but just the kind of casual nature of it. It's Zoliak, the relatively experimental.
The relatively,
not he's super experimental.
Semi-experimental. He likes to drive a little fast.
That's right. Like 85 in the 70s.
Yeah, a little fast. All right.
And then the last one is just absolutely blatant, and I'm curious to see if this one ends up on the ban list. It's not there now. I checked. The Nether Tickler.
What? That if it does not show up on the ban list, I'm hoping it wins like a prestigious tournament. So the FFG has to put that like front and center. The Nether Tickler has won worlds. That's so good. Well done. You have done a good job searching these out. Nice. Well, if you think you can beat Chris, submit some of your favorite decks, and I'll be curious to see them. Cool. So, any last thoughts? For me, just one thing I want to say is I'm used to being on, first of all, on casts other people are hosting. So if I seem like a horrible host, then it's because I've never hosted before. I miss you, Mo, from Earth 2. But also, I'm not used to being on a cast with only one other person. And it can definitely, it's nice to have more people. I'd like to get to like 3 or 4 people on here with different points of view and thoughts. So if you're interested in that, you could also email us at castofthearchons@gmail.com. If you're looking for some super high budget hardcore grinder cast, then maybe there are other places. But if you want to just chat KeyForge like we've done tonight, then yeah, I'd love to talk to you. And then yeah, just I am really enjoying this and I'm excited to see where it goes. And thanks for doing this with me, Chris. I think I'm really excited to be doing this. Our plans, I believe, are to do this every other week. So that means that our next cast will be sometime in the first week of December. So if you're watching us now and next week you're like, where are they? That's the deal, is every other week we're hoping to do this. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Patrick. It's been a blast talking KeyForge, and it's nice to much like KeyForge itself. The great thing I find about KeyForge is that it's kind of scratches a different itch than the other games I play, like Game of Thrones and stuff, where you have to worry about the deck building and the metagaming and trying to figure it out. Whereas this is, you just like sit down at a deck across from a buddy and kind of throw cards at each other. And I feel like that's what we've done today. And in a metaphorical sense, and I've really enjoyed it. So thank you for having me. And yeah, if you want to join us, we'd love to have you, and hope to keep going strong.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Chris. And this is Cast of the Archons signing off. Bye.